Vasudeva sutam devam kamsa chanuramardanam devaki paramanandam krishnam vande jagadguru. So we are studying the Bhagavad Gita in this class, and we are on the 10th chapter. Now what's going on here is Sri Krishna has introduced Arjuna to a deeper and wider conception of God. So one way of looking at God is, as it has been taught in my tradition, maybe as Shiva or as Vishnu or as the Divine Mother, in a particular form, in a particular name, and that's it. As it is worshipped in the temple, as my Guru or my scripture has taught me, that's God. Now, that's all right. Swami Vivekananda says the goal is to see God everywhere. But if you cannot, and most of us we cannot, if you cannot see God everywhere, see God in one thing, in one form, in one name. And that's what religions of the world do. They give you a conception of God. But the truth is that God is not just that one form or one name or one conception. God is present in everything. God is indeed everything. So to go to that wider conception of God, Sri Krishna says this entire universe is my manifestation. I become or transform myself or appear as this universe. Therefore, you can find me in everything in this universe. Just as wood, you make all sorts of furniture out of wood, but in that furniture you can find the wood. So it's just wood. In all the waves that are born of water, you can find water. It's just water. Similarly, in the universe that is born of God, you can find God. And that's what Krishna is going to do in this chapter. He's going to say you can find God everywhere in this universe. What's happening here, philosophically speaking, is, as I've often said, Vivekananda says, we Hindus worship a transcendent, immanent God. So God who's beyond space, time and creation. But a God also who is in and through this space, time and creation, everywhere, in everything. Transcendent means beyond all this. Immanent means in and through all this. So both, the Hindus worship God as both. So for the Hindus, it is no problem to say that God is here with us, everywhere. Now the way Krishna does it is, this universe is the glory of God. In Sanskrit, vibhuti. Vibhuti. Vibhuti means glory of God. And in order to point that out, so he tells Arjuna that you can meditate upon God by looking at this universe. Now Arjuna asks, can you give me some examples? How am I to do that? And what Krishna does is, he gives a list of things which you see in this universe, or you know about, or at least a devout Hindu in Arjuna's time would know about, and points out that that's where I am. You think of me there. And usually what he does is, he points out the most excellent, most glorious, most powerful, most well-known, famous, whatever it is that attracts us most first. It's easier to see God in something glorious, something nice, pleasant, awesome, and then to see it. You can see it in the quasar, but you can also see it in the particle of dust. It's there everywhere. So that he's going to give us a list here. Even this idea is intermediate. Beyond this lies the great unity of aham brahmasmi. Whatever is the reality in this universe is the reality within yourself. It is one and the same. You are that absolute existence, consciousness, bliss all the time, present all the time. Most obvious. But it's not easier to get to there. So that's why Vivekananda says, so that's like you can think of it as 3 steps. Think of God in one way. Develop your faith and devotion. Then think of that same God present everywhere. And then know it to be your innermost reality. I and that are one reality, non-duality. So we know of the great devotee of Krishna, the baby Krishna's devotee, Gopal Ma. Those who know the story of Sri Ramakrishna, they have heard of this. She was a Brahmin widow who spent all her life in prayer and devotion to Krishna, the baby Krishna. Now, after some time, she saw that baby Krishna everywhere and in everybody. So you see how it moves from one form in one way to be present everywhere. I have myself heard one Mataji high in the Himalayas, Subhadra Mataji, for those who have known her. She passed a few years ago. She used to worship Gopala as the baby Krishna. And she would say, Baba, sab Gopal hai. My child, everything, all are Gopala. So what's going to happen now is all philosophical build-up, but not much philosophical content is there right now. Krishna is going to give you a catalog of, you can see me here, here, and here. So he's just going to tell you things where you can visualize God, which you can use to remind yourself of God. So not much philosophical content, but plenty of stories. So I was thinking, what do I do with these verses? I can just read it out. But they all have stories. These are all taken from the Puranas. So I'll tell you a few stories maybe just to, instead of just reading out the verses. We will read the verses. And the next few verses, up to the end of this chapter, we'll go pretty fast. I think we had done the 22nd verse, if you remember. 23rd verse. Rudrāṇāṁ śhaṅkaraśh chāsmi, Rudrāṇāṁ śhaṅkaraśh chāsmi, vitteśho yakṣha-rakṣhasām, vitteśho yakṣa-rakṣhasām, vasūnāṁ pāvakaśh chāsmi, vasūnāṁ pāvakaśh chāsmi, meruḥ śhikhariṇām aham, meruḥ śhikhariṇām aham. Of the Rudras, I am Sankara. Of the yakṣas and rakṣhasas, I am Kubera. Of the Vasus, I am fire. And among mountains, I am meruḥ. So the Rudras are certain deities, and among them, and they are all supposed to be forms of auspiciousness. Among them, the most well-known and the most beloved, most worshipped is, of course, Sankara. Literally, the meaning of the word Sankara is śhaṅkaroti, the one who is auspicious or bestows auspiciousness. So among all the Rudras, now for us it may not be evocative because whoever worships Rudras here in Manhattan 21st century, but it was something common for the Vedic people. Among all of them, know me to be Sankara. Now does it mean that he is not the other deities? He is. God is all. But want to meditate? Here, take one and focus here. Of the yakṣha-rakṣhasās. So vitteśho, the Lord of wealth. Again, all of these stories take us back. Those who have grown up in India, if you'll know all these stories, especially if you have read Amar Chitra Katha comics and heard stories from your grandmother or whatever. So the Lord of wealth, everybody knows, is Kubera. So among the yakṣas, divine beings called yakṣas, and the rakṣhasas, the demons, I am Kubera, the Lord of wealth. So this is the person in charge of money. You can see he's a much sought after person, yes. So he is a demigod, what you might call a demigod. He's not really divine or godlike, but in charge of money. And curiously, Krishna has clubbed together two kinds of supernatural beings, the yakshas and the rakshasas. The yakshas are different kinds of demigods, and the rakshasas are demons. But he has put them together and says, among them I am Kubera. Kubera is actually known to be a yaksha, not a demon. But the commentator here, this is from Sridhar Swami's commentary, he makes an interesting observation. Why did Krishna club these two quite distinct varieties of supernatural beings together? He says here, he says, Krurattvādi samyād. He says, because these demons and the yakshas, they are equally cruel. So they have some similar qualities. That's why Krishna has clubbed them together. And he says that Kubera, I am Kubera. Think of me in the form of Kubera. then of all that is purifying. Among the Vasus, the deities called Vasus, I am fire. The god of fire, Agni. So the god of fire, Agni, is very special for the Vedic Hindus because Agni is called Hutavaha. Hutavaha means that the one who carries your sacrificial offerings to the gods. So these Vedic Hindus would light the sacrificial fires, and with elaborate sacrifices they would offer clarified butter, ghee and other things with an accompaniment of Vedic mantras being chanted. And the fire, that sacrificial fire, was called Hutavaha, the one who carries your offerings to heaven, to the Vedic gods. This led the Charvakas, the materialists of ancient India. They were always trying to poke. They were skeptical and poke holes in the religion of the day. So one of the things I remember they say is that, so if you offer offerings to the fire in the name of your father or grandfather, and so that after death he will go to heaven, you organize an elaborate sacrifice, and the fire takes the offerings to the gods in heaven. Why don't you toss your father or grandfather into the fire? He'll go straight to heaven. So they are a mischievous lot. They are not very popular. And then fire is also said to be the mouth of God. It's associated with the power of speech. Even in English, we have, he gave a fiery speech. Somehow fire has something to do with speech. He spoke words of fire. Or he spoke fire. So, fire. Meruḥ śhikhariṇām aham. Among the peaks, that means mountains with peaks, I am the fabulous Mount Meru, which is present in the mythology across India, South Asia. By the way, many of these stories, things which I'll talk about today, are present in different ways, not only throughout the Indian subcontinent, but throughout South Asia, Southeast Asia. One of our close associates who recently visited Vietnam, Cambodia, Southeast Asia, was talking about the widespread presence of Sanskrit words and Indian motifs. You see Garuda, Hanuman, the king of Cambodia, one of the titles is Senapati, which is leader of the armies, which is a Sanskrit term. And so many Sanskrit terms in their language and even in the culture right now. But they're not Hindus now. Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, they're mostly Buddhist. Malaysia and Indonesia, mostly Muslim. But you see widespread. And many of these stories are current there. So the fabulous Mount Meru, which is supposed to be the repository of all kinds of jewels and gold and whatnot. So among all the mountains, the peaked one, the high peaks, I am Meru. Think of me when you think of Meru. The point is not to think of the Mount Meru or fire or Kubera. That's just distraction. It's in all of these things you think of God. Let these remind you of God. Moving on. 24th verse. Purodhasam cha mukhyam mam, Purodhasam cha mukhyam mam, Viddhi partha brihaspatim, Viddhi partha brihaspatim, Senaninām aham skanda, Senaninām aham skanda, Sarasamasmi sagaraha, Sarasamasmi sagaraha. Know that I am Brihaspati, the foremost among priests, O Partha. Of army leaders, I am Skanda. Of natural reservoirs, I am the ocean. So, among all the priests, the Vedic priests who perform sacrifices, most famed was Brihaspati. He was the guru of the gods, Devatas, the guru of all the gods, Brihaspati. He was supposed to be fabulously learned and the greatest of the priests who would preside over these Vedic sacrifices. So a very famous person, Brihaspati, and supposed to be exceptionally intelligent and very learned. So much so that in some parts of India, if you want to say you want to call somebody dumb, you would say that, oh, you are a regular Brihaspati. Like when you say here, like, that was sheer genius, or you're a genius. When you are saying that somebody is being silly, so like that, they sometimes say, some parts of India say, oh, you're a Brihaspati, which means you're actually dumb. But he is so intelligent and so learned and so learned in the ways of Vedic ritualism. So among all the priests, know me to be Brihaspati, which means when you think of Brihaspati, think of God. Among all the generals, see, Senaninam, we were just talking about Senapati. Among all generals, I am the general of the gods, Skanda, Kartikeya. Sarasam asmi sagara. Of all water reservoirs, more than any lake or pond or whatever, the ocean is the greatest reservoir. So when you see the ocean, think of God. I am the ocean among all reservoirs. Then 25th. Maharshinam bhriguraham, Maharshinam bhriguraham, Giramasmekamaksharam, Giramasmekamaksharam, Yajñānām japayajñosmi, Yajñānām japayajñosmi, Sthavarāṇāṁ Himalaya, Sthavarāṇāṁ Himalaya. Of the great sages I am Bhrigu, of words I am the monosyllable Om, of sacrifices I am the Japa sacrifice, of immovables I am the Himalayas. So of the great sages, Rishi. The Rishis were the sages who revealed the Vedas. So Rishaya Mantra Drashtara, those who saw the spiritual truths, they are called Rishis. And there are many of them. We know of the Sapta Rishis, the 7 Rishis, for example, and the star constellation of the 7 Rishis, and so on. Among them, Krishna says, Bhrigu is one of the most famous. There are descendants among the Hindus who trace their descent from Bhrigu, so they're called Bhargava. So this Bhrigu, I am. When you think of Bhrigu, think of me. Many stories, Bhrigu. He's the one who famously decided. There was a big question: who is greater among Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesvara, the 3 forms of God? Who decided? And it was decided that Vishnu is the greatest among them. And who decided? Who decided? Bhrigu, this Rishi. The story is quite funny, actually. Now, Bhrigu, he had a reputation for. So these are now we're going to stories and the stories always had a point. There are 2 kinds of sources of these stories in Hinduism. One is called Itihasa, another is called Purana. So Itihasa, Mahabharata, Ramayana, these were stories, but they were firmly based in some kind of historical fact. So they primarily wanted to convey something that had happened. Literally, Itihasa means, thus it happened. Itihasa, thus it was. The Puranas, they have a nugget of truth in them also, but the point there is not history. The point there is, it is like teaching a moral, trying to convey a message, to convey a deep philosophical truth through colorful stories. That's why the Puranic stories will have multiple versions. It doesn't matter. You ask which one, was it this way or that way? Both ways, it's fine, as long as you get the point. Myths. We often hear the word myth is very misleading, because when you say myth, it means, oh, it doesn't happen, it's false, it's not real. The scholar of religion, Reza Aslan, he said, myths are always true. Myths are always true, because the truth they want to convey is a deep truth for humanity. So they are always true. It's not at all about historical fact. History itself is always changing. I'm reminded there was a workshop. There was a conference in the New School here in Manhattan, and the theme was very interesting. The theme of the conference was the unknown, unknown and unknowable. And there were speakers, leading speakers from every field. Science, and from physics we had John Barrows. Then we had, so there was someone from physics, there was someone from mathematics, there was somebody from history, literature. So history, there was this professor, I forget his name, he was from England, I think from Cambridge or the University of Sussex, I forget. But he said something that has remained in my memory. He said, the future is fixed. The past is always changing. What do you mean? He says future is fixed in the sense that something will happen. Something will happen. We don't know it. Something will happen. But the past for us is history. It's the human discipline of history. When you're trying to understand what happened in the past and explain it, all of that depends on your evidence, your historical theories, your changing theories of what happened in the past. So the past is always changing, and the future is fixed. So these are stories from the Puranas. So I'm saying this because, especially for Indians here, you would say, no, that's not the way it was. I heard it the other way around. There are many, many versions of these stories. So the story of Bhrigu, for example. Oh yes, how did he come to choose, to select that Vishnu was the greatest among Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesvara, Shiva? Now, the problem with Bhrigu was he was notoriously hot-tempered and arrogant and a great sage. So how did he get cured and how did he get enlightened? So he was asked to find out who is tasked with finding out who is greater, Brahma, Vishnu, Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the cosmic, the one who destroys the cosmos at the end of creation. He goes to Brahma. Long story short, I'll cut it short because there's lots. Long story short, Brahma was busy, could not give him an audience. Brahma happened to be his father also, Bhrigu's father. Give him an audience. Bhrigu very naturally lost his temper, as was expected. And he misbehaved with Brahma, and Brahma was about to curse him, so Bhrigu ran for his life. Next, he decided to visit Kailasha to meet Shiva, to check him out and see how great he is. And Shiva, lo and behold, was busy and couldn't grant him an audience. And Bhrigu lost his temper and misbehaved with Shiva, and Shiva was also lost his temper and was about to curse him. And Bhrigu ran for his life, and he thought, I should go to Vaikuntha, the abode of Vishnu, and find out how great Vishnu is. So he goes there, and to his exasperation, he finds Vishnu sleeping on the cosmic serpent, where he's always sleeping. And so he was sleeping and snoring. The snoring, not really snoring. That was my touch. I thought it was a good touch. He was snoring, and Bhrigu couldn't take it anymore. He was horrified. You're supposed to be God. Don't you have work to do? And so he goes up to Vishnu, and it's a famous story. He kicks Vishnu in the chest. And wake up. Don't you have work to do? And so Vishnu opens his eyes and holds on to the sage's feet on his chest. And he says very sweetly, "Oh revered sir, I hope kicking my chest didn't hurt your foot." And he held his foot to his chest and used that. So here's the thing. Bhrigu had this eye. He had an eye in his foot. And that... And that was not the third eye of knowledge, this was the eye of ignorance. And that was the whole point of the story, that somehow he had to be cured of this ignorance. And Vishnu expertly and gently removed that eye of ignorance from his foot and let go of his foot. And immediately Bhrigu was cured of his arrogance and anger, and he bowed down to Vishnu and said, "You are the greatest." So that was Bhrigu. But there are many, many stories about Bhrigu. One I particularly like, and which many Indians here will identify with, is his son, one of his sons. So almost all of these sages were householders. They were all married and they all had children. So one of his sons was the sage Chavana. And this son was so austere. He did so much meditation and fasting and sat rooted in one place meditating, that a termite hill grew around him. And it grew and covered him until 2 eyes were left, nothing else. Now one day a king came hunting there with his hunting party, and they saw these 2 bright eyes staring out of a termite hill. And they poked it with a stick, hurting the sage, who was furious with them. And finally the king begged forgiveness, and gave his only daughter in marriage to the sage. And so the daughter, she was a very devoted wife, and she took care of the sage, who was already very sickly and emaciated from his austerities and his fasting and his meditations. So she took care of him. Again, long story short, there's a long story here. The two twins, another branch of demigods, the Ashwins. So they are the masters of herbs. Not that kind. There are many masters of herbs now. Ever since the law was it was legalized last year, a couple of years back. But yes, so they happened to come across the sage's wife, and they offered to heal him. And they prepared a medicine, and they gave it to the sage, who regained his youth and his vigor and all. He was very happy, and he blessed the Ashwins that from now on, in the great Vedic sacrifices, you will get a portion of the offerings, which they are not entitled to because they are not strictly Vedic gods. Anyway, why am I telling this story? What does it have to do with Bhrigu? So this medicine, which was given to the sage Chavana, those are from from India, nowhere this is leading. It's none other than the infamous, notorious Chyavanprash, which is a medicine ever since given to Indian kids for the last 5,000 years or so. I myself been fed that, and all of us have horror stories of that medicine. It is the most awful concoction. I think almost every Indian kid has been force-fed by their concerned moms, the Chyavanprash. No, but I've come across people who love Chyavanprash, so we can't say it's awful. Anyway, that's the story. Yeah, wonderful stories, right? So this is the story of Bhrigu. Among the great Maharshi, the great rishis, I am Bhrigu. Among words, giram asmi ekam aksharam, I am that single syllable, Om, Krishna says. This is a no-brainer. If he had to pick one letter, he would have picked Om. So it's the holiest mantra in all of Hinduism, or just Hinduism. It's important in Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, all the Indic religions. Om. And it's used before every mantra, every prayer. It starts with Om. Then you want to sanctify something, you chant Om. Meditation, one great way of meditation. In Advaita Vedanta, they say Dirgha Pranava Uchcharana, chanting of a prolonged Om, and on and on and on. So it calms down the mind very fast and directly. The Yoga Sutras say Tasya Vachaka Pranava. Om is the name of God. So Om is the name of God. What else? And of course, most famously in Advaita Vedanta, Om, the shortest and most powerful of Upanishads, the Mandukya Upanishad, is all about Om. The phonetic constituents of Om are the three letters A, U, Ma. A, U, Ma. It's not Aum. If you combine them, it becomes Om. Many people didn't know that, and when they know it, and now I know it's actually A, U, Ma, and so I should pronounce it as Aum. No, don't. Little knowledge is dangerous. In fact, the A and the U, in English you write it as A-U-M, but the A and the U, if you put it together by the rules of Sanskrit grammar, it becomes O. So the way we write it in English is actually absolutely correct. O-M is absolutely correct. Om. And these three constituents, they are taken to stand for A stands for you, the waker, and your entire waking experience, this world. U stands for you, the person in the dream, and your entire dream world, whichever dream you're in. And the last last constituent sound, stands for the deep sleep, where subject and object are mushed together in a featureless blankness. And when you chant it, that is your entire experience of life. together you chant it as Om. Don't chant separately and separately and separately, but to chant Om. And you're supposed to see that all our life, waking, all our dreams, and all times of deep sleep, anesthesia, coma, whatever it is, all of them are coming and going before one consciousness. And the silence after Om represents this consciousness. So, the entire Mandukya Upanishad, the Mandukya Upanishad is very short, and it is the most direct, most powerful, which tells you that you are this ever-present consciousness in which appears the cosmos, the physical cosmos of the waking, the mental cosmos of the dream, and the causal cosmos of the deep sleep. And all of them appear, disappear, and reappear in one consciousness. They are not apart from that consciousness. That one consciousness is the absolute reality of this universe, and you are that. You are that. Ayam Atma Brahma, the Mandukya Upanishad says. And that's the meaning of Om. That's the most philosophical and deep meaning of Om. But Om has various manifestations across the Indic culture. So naturally, Krishna says, among all letters, I am Om. Yakṣha-ṇāṁ japa-yakṣho asmi. Among all rituals, especially the rituals which were prevalent in the Vedic times, yajna, which means a fire ritual. Among all the rituals, I am actually the ritual of repeating God's name. Repeating God's name. So if you repeat Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, the name of Krishna, or Om Namah Shivaya, the name of Shiva, and so on, or you have been initiated into a mantra, to repeat that mantra as has been taught to you by your guru, that is called japa-yajna, the offering of the names of God. And here Krishna says, that's the most powerful, the best. Among all sacrifices, I am that. That's the glory of God. In our order, as in many Hindu orders, japa-yajna, the spiritual practice called japa, is the primary spiritual practice, which is connected with meditation and japa and dhyana. So we are initiated by a guru and given an Ishta Devata, that God in this particular form is the way you will practice. This is the form in which you will worship God. All forms are God, but in this particular form is your own, and you have to worship God in this way, and this is the name associated with it, and there will be Om, and there usually is a mystic syllable associated with it, and so this mantra you have to repeat. How many times? All the time, ideally, but that's too difficult. All right, and then the guru will tell you, depending upon the guru, 108 times, and then multiples of 108, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, whatever. So this is called japa-yajna. This is saying, japat siddhi. Enlightenment, perfection comes from japa, from repeating the mantra. This was something stressed by Sri Ramakrishna, especially by Ma Sharada, by the Holy Mother. She recommended this for all her disciples. You must do japa. Repeat the name of God. And then you can do it with your hands, and the Guru will show you how, or with a rosary. Not only in Hinduism, but repetition of names. Like Buddhism, there is no God. But japa is a very powerful thing. You'll find most of the Tibetan Buddhist monks, they have a rosary, which they are using for repeating. Then in Islam, so they repeat the 99 names of God as you find in the Quran. In Christianity, in, for example, Catholicism, and especially the Eastern Orthodox traditions. So there is this beautiful book, you should read it if you have not, The Way of the Pilgrim. It's from the Russian Orthodox Church, about this man who repeats the Jesus prayer continuously. Lord Jesus, have mercy upon me. That much. All through whatever he is doing in life, wherever he's traveling, wherever he's eating, talking, meeting with different people, encountering ups and downs in life, hard times in life, all the time that one goes on in the background. And if you read this, your mind calms down, just reading the book. So this is a book on japa. And here Krishna says, among all rituals, I am the ritual of repeating the name of God, japa-yajna. Among all immovable masses, he says, I am Himalaya, the mountains. all mountains are beautiful. There's something spiritual about mountains, hills and mountains. But especially the Himalayas. Those who have been there, I remember, for Indians especially, it evokes strong mystic associations. I remember the first time I was going to the Himalayas after becoming a monk. This was about 20 years ago. I still clearly remember. You had to go around and round those hills in the bus with other passengers as you climb higher and higher and higher. All they're low-lying hills first and then higher hills. And then suddenly it turns a bend in its going round and round, where in the distance you see your first snow peaks, snow-clad peaks, though the real giants of the Himalayas. I remember once I was in Colorado, where the Rockies start, right? So we went up to this peak, about 14,000 feet high. In Colorado, we had gone from Denver up there. And the rangers, they told me, when they said I'm from India, a monk from India, he said, oh, you are the real giants in the Himalayas. So right, you see them towering. So I was in Gangotri, which is actually low, because the mountains surrounding Gangotri is 10,000 feet high. And the mountains surrounding Gangotri are 15, 20, 25,000 feet. You see the real giants from our ashram in Mayavati, which was established by Swami Vivekananda. You can see K2, the second highest peak in the world, and so on. So those are the real giants. And here he says, among all the immovable masses, I am Himalaya. Again, the point is not to go on a tour of the Himalayas. Let the thought of the Himalayas remind you of God. Let the thought of the sage Bhrigu remind you of God. And japa, of course, it reminds you of God. 26. Ashvatha sarva vrikshanam, Ashvatha sarva vrikshanam, Devarshinam cha narada, Devarshinam cha narada, Gandharvanam chitraratha, Gandharvanam chitraratha, Siddhanam kapilo munihi, Siddhanam kapilo munihi. Of all the trees, I am the Ashvatha people tree. Of divine sages, I am Narada. Of Gandharvas, I am Chitraratha. And among perfect souls, I am the saint Kapila. So Narada, of course, is a famous rishi. Again, very beloved in stories in India. He's a devotee of Vishnu, Narayana, and he sings the praises of Vishnu, and he travels all the worlds, and he has a stringed instrument called the veena. And he famously sings the praises of Vishnu. Also, he is associated with the leelas of Vishnu. So Vishnu famously comes as avatars, incarnates from time to time in human affairs, and often he has people to help him out, other divine beings, and Narada is one of them. And Narada usually sets the scene, usually by creating a mess. That's why it's well known among in Indian folklore that Narada appearing means some trouble is going to happen, and then Vishnu comes and fixes it. So they have this understanding. And there's so many beautiful stories. David Chalmers, in his new book, Reality Plus, he has a cartoon of Vishnu and Narada in one of the early chapters, talking about Maya, about virtual reality. So one of the stories, many stories about Narada. So Narada asks Vishnu, can you show me your Maya? I've heard so much about your Maya by which you project this universe, your divine power. Vishnu says, ask something else. You're asking for trouble. Narada says, no, I want to know that. And then Vishnu says, all right, I'll show you, but first get me some water. I'm parched. And then Narada goes to the nearby village, and he finds a well, and there's this girl who is drawing water from the well, and Narada goes and asks her, can you give me some water? And she says, yes. And Narada sees this girl and falls in love with her immediately, and then is totally forgotten that Vishnu is waiting for water. Then he follows her home, and then he asks her father for her hand in marriage, and then he gets married to that girl, and he settles down, and the father offers part of their farmlands and all. So he's now a farmer, well-to-do, settled there. And then they have, I think, 3 kids over the years. And the years pass happily. And then one night there is a great flash flood. They didn't have this alert on the mobile phone, flash flood alert. And so when he wakes up, he finds there's a deluge of water coming in and so pouring into the house, and everything is floating away. Somehow he grabs the kids with one hand, and the youngest kid he puts on his shoulder. With the other hand, he grabs his wife, and they struggle out into the flood waters. And to his horror, one by one, the kids are swept away from his hand by the force of the water. His wife is swept away, and then he is thrown on the shore, weeping and wailing. He loses consciousness, and then he comes to. He is bitterly crying, and then suddenly he sees Vishnu standing in front of him. It's quite all right. It's dry land. And Vishnu looks at him quizzically and says, Narada, where have you been? I've been waiting quite the quarter of an hour for 15 minutes, 20 minutes has gone by. Where's the water? Half an hour, 15 minutes. And 10 years or some 12 years had passed in Narada's life, and so many things had happened. That is Maya. The same question was asked by a disciple to Vivekananda in Belur, in the monastery. So this disciple, Vivekananda, was pleased with him and said, ask me for anything. And the disciple said, I want to know what Maya is. And Vivekananda said, ask something else. And the disciple said, if by getting a guru like you, I don't understand what Maya is, then I have no hope, sir. So this is my question. I want an answer to this. And then Vivekananda started speaking, and the disciple notes in his reminiscences, it's as if the room started spinning around me, and everything began to disappear into a great void. And there was just this mass of luminosity remaining. I couldn't see my own body, I couldn't see Vivekananda, just this mass of luminosity, and yet somehow Vivekananda's words were still audible there. And I broke out and I shouted in excitement, oh, this is the truth. Then everything that we know is Maya, including your monastery and your Ramakrishna mission and all of that is also Maya. And now what he wrote was, he spoke in Bengali. So in Indian languages, you have these gradations of address. In Hindi, you have aap, means thou. You address somebody superior, or your guru, or your parents, or something like that. And tum means somebody at the same level. So he addressed, Vivekananda is his guru. So in Bengali he should have said apni. But he suddenly noticed he was calling Vivekananda Tumi, which is a familiarity with somebody who's an equal. That struck him. And the moment this idea of difference came into his mind, everything snapped back into place. There was Vivekananda looking at him and smiling, and there was the river and the monastery and whatnot, and he was there. And Vivekananda looked at him and nodded, you are right, it is all Maya. If you can be absorbed in Brahman, go beyond it all. If you cannot, then come and help me in this work. So sadhana, if you can, you don't need sadhana, you're done. The game of life is over for you, you have reached the highest. If you cannot, most of us cannot, then come here. Service of humanity, meditation, prayer, all the spiritual practices, come here. The question in your minds would be, what did Vivekananda say? We would like to know that. And although he has not written anything what Vivekananda said, the gentleman, but we have 3 lectures of Vivekananda on Maya. So if you look at the complete works of Vivekananda, the Jnana Yoga, that book, there are 3 lectures on Maya. I suppose he must have said something of that sort to the disciple. Then Narada. So that story, Narada and Vishnu standing there talking about Maya, virtual reality. So David Chalmers has put it in his book as a cartoon. Narada and Vishnu are standing there. Gandharvanam Chitraratha. Among the Gandharvas are divine singers, the musicians. They are also demigods. They are not exactly Vedic gods, but they are musicians of an extraordinarily high caliber. I mean, something you would find in the Juilliard or something, I guess. And they are also relatively immortal, so they're much longer lived than human beings. and they have superior power, so they're invisible to us. But they're all the time in music. How it could be? Who was it? Bach or Beethoven, who became deaf? Beethoven, yeah. And he could hear all music in his mind, not literally outside. And he could still keep on composing. Which means it's not really this physical ear which is all that important. If you tune the subtle body inside the mind in a particular way, you don't even need to hear music, to actually hear music. Probably his experience of music was even more ethereal, even more superfine than the way we hear it. That gives you an idea about what Gandharvas might be. So among them, one of the most talented is Chitraratha. And Krishna says, when you think of the Gandharvas and Chitraratha, think of me. Siddhanam Kapilo Muni. Among the perfected ones, those who are self-realized, Kapila is one of the great sages in Hinduism is Kapila. So he's supposed to be the first of the perfected ones. Vivekananda says Kapila was the first philosopher of the human race. And he is the one who gives us the Sankhya system of philosophy, Sankhya Darshana, Kapila Rishi, or Kapila Muni. And then 27th. Uchchaishavasamashvanam, Uchchaishavasamashvanam, Viddhi mamamritodbhavam, Viddhi mamamritodbhavam, Airavatam gajendranam, Airavatam gajendranam, Naranam cha naradhipam, Naranam cha naradhipam. Of horses, know me to be Uchchaishravas, born of the churning for nectar, of lordly elephants, Airavata, and amongst men, the king. So this is the horse of the gods. Uchchaishravas is the mount of Indra. So this goes back to the very old story for the churning of nectar. So in the ocean there is nectar or amrita. Those who drink of this nectar become immortal. And the gods wanted it, and the demons wanted it. And so Vishnu told them that yes, you go and this is where you dig. In Google Maps he pointed out. And so they're the great churning of the ocean. And the prize was nectar. And those who have nectar become immortal. Obviously they become supreme among all beings, among humans and gods and demons. Ultimately we know that the gods got it. That's why they became immortal. But while it was being churned, to churn they used the Mount Meru. So to churn. And while it was being churned, lots of things came up, good and bad. First of all, a poison came up called Garala, which literally means poison. But it threatened to destroy the universe. And Shiva drank it to preserve the universe. And that it left a blue spot on his neck. That's why it's called Nilakantha. Who drinks, so Shiva is the one who drinks all the suffering and poison and awfulness of this world so that we are spared of that poison. Then came lots of treasures, which they all vied for. So for example, this horse was one of them, a divine horse, a divine elephant, and so many things like that. So Mam Amritodbhavam, from nectar, that means from the churning for the nectar. Remember that story? From there comes this horse. Well, think of that excellent horse. If you think of it, you think of me. And the great elephant, Airavata, who also was one of the treasures which came up while the ocean was being churned for nectar. All of these, by the way, they have deep psychological meaning. Churning an ocean for nectar is basically plumbing the depths of our unconscious. And great treasures come up. And awful things come up. So this churning, I don't know where they did it, but this was the place, Manhattan, in the 1950s and 60s. Everybody was churning the ocean for nectar. Everybody had a psychoanalyst, and some of the greatest psychoanalysts, they migrated from Europe to America, and they were here. Yes. Then Airavatam Gajendranam. The king of elephants was also recovered from the churning of the ocean. Think of me when you think of that. Narāṇāṁ ca naradhipam, the king among all human beings. It's interesting because as long as we have had kings and queens, they always were associated with divine right. So the god rules as the king. So the king was sort of divinity among human beings. And here he says, when you look at the king, think of God. 28. Ayudhanam aham vajram, Ayudhanam aham vajram, Dhenunam asmi kamadhuk, Dhenunam asmi kamadhuk, Prajanashchasmi kandarpa, Prajanashchasmi kandarpa, Sarpanam asmi vasuki, Sarpanam asmi vasuki. Of weapons, I am the thunderbolt. Of cows, I am the kamadhenu. I am the productive passion. And of poisonous serpents, I am Vasuki. So, Ayudhanam aham vajram. I think I mentioned it where in the Mundakopanishad class. The thunderbolt, the weapon of the gods, the weapon of Indra. So, that weapon was made by the bones of the righteous saint Dadhiji. The great Vritrasura, the great demon, was defeating the gods, and so only a special weapon could kill this demon, and the weapon was to be made of the bones of the sage Dadhiji. And so the gods went to the sage who was meditating and asked him for a boon, and he says anything. So they asked him, well, basically asking him to die, so that they can have their bones. So we want your bones, and he gladly gave up his body in meditation, and they made the thunderbolt out of the bones of the sage. That's the weapon of Indra, the king of the gods, and with which he defeated the great demon Vritrasura. So I am Vajra, I am the thunderbolt. Among cows, I am Kamadhenu, who is supposed to give whatever you wish. Kamadhenu literally means milked for desires. Whatever you desire, that the cow gives. Again, one of the treasures which came up in the churning of the ocean. An interesting, Kandarpa, the god of love, Prajanashchasmi. And he says, I am the god of love. Among all things that are productive, reproductive, I am the god of love. And there, the commentator immediately flags this. He says, Prajana, Praja Utpatti Hetu, that which leads to reproduction. I am the sexual urge, Kamo Asmi, I am lust, I am passion. But then the commentator says, Na kevalam sambhoga pradhana, Kamo, madvibhuti, ashastriyatvat. This is the sexual urge, lust, for the purpose which nature intended it to be, for reproduction and the propagation of the species and continuation of nature, of samsara, but not for sensual enjoyment. Why? So Krishna says that lust which is used for sensual enjoyment is not my glory. Ashastriyatvat, because this is not approved by the scriptures. So people can immediately misunderstand. Look, here Krishna says, my glory is lust. No, that power which leads to the continuation of life, which you see all around in nature, everywhere. And that is the glory of God, but not for sensual enjoyment. Then the next one. Anantaschasmi naganam, Anantaschasmi naganam, Varuno yadasamaham, Varuno yadasamaham, Pitrinam aryama chāsmi, Pitrinam aryama chāsmi, Yama sangyamatamaham, Yama sangyamatamaham. Among non-poisonous snakes, so he's making a distinction between poisonous snakes and non-poisonous snakes. I am Ananta, of aquatic beings which dwell in water. I am Varuna, the king of the oceans. Of the forefathers, I am Aryaman. Aryaman is the king of the forefathers, of a plane where our forefathers dwell temporarily. So the king is Aryaman. Of the regulators, I am Yama, the god of death. Then number 30. Pralladaschasmi daityanam, Pralladaschasmi daityanam, Kala kalayatamaham, Kala kalayatamaham, Mriganam cha mrigendroham, mrigaṇāṁ ca mrigendroham vainateyascha pakshinām vainateyascha pakshinām. Of demons I am Prahlāda, of reckoners I am time, among beasts I am the lion, and among birds I am Garuda. So among demons I am Prahlāda. Again, a well-known story. Prahlāda, the devotee of God, of Vishnu. So he was actually the son. He was a demon. He was the son of the powerful and evil demon king Hiranyakashipu. So a well-known and beloved story, which not from Sanskrit studies, but I got it from Amar Chitra Katha when I was a little kid. The story is well known that Prahlāda loved God, and his father, the mighty demon king Hiranyakashipu, hated God. So he couldn't bear it that his son loved God, and he tried every possible way to dissuade him from loving God, including telling his tutors, don't teach him about God. Let him not hear the word name of Narayan or Vishnu and so on. Finally, his atrocities went to such an extent that Vishnu came to the rescue of his child devotee Prahlāda. In fact, in iconography, whenever Prahlāda is shown, although he became the king of the demons later on, but he's always shown as a child. So Vishnu comes to the rescue of his child as an avatar, and this is the famous Nrisingha avatar, the man-lion avatar. So the story is, Hiranyakashipu was so powerful, he was arrogant because nobody could kill him. He had got, he asked for a boon from, I think, Brahma. And he said, make me immortal like the gods. And Brahma said, no, that I can't give. Then Hiranyakashipu said, all right, just make it that I cannot be killed with any weapons. And I cannot be killed in a day or in the night. And I cannot be killed in the heavens or on the earth or in the netherworld. And I can't be killed inside the house or outside the house. So like this, he sort of set all conditions, and Brahma said, all right. And I cannot be killed by animals, human beings, demons, gods. And weapons also, not by weapons. So he thought he was pretty safe. Who's going to kill him? And so then what happened was, finally God could not bear the tortures on his child devotee, so he decided to wipe out this demon king. And one day, they were having the father-son argument, the same old argument. There's no such thing as God. God is useless and whatnot. And the father was saying, where's this God of yours? And the little boy said, he's everywhere. And the father said, where? It's nonsense. Where is God? Is he in this pillar? Like there's a big stone pillar. And Prahlāda said, yes, he's in that pillar. And his father wanted to show him once for all. That's all nonsense. And with a mighty kick, he kicked down the pillar. Imagine he's a demon king, right? So he kicked down the stone pillar. And to his horror and amazement, from the pillar burst out this terrible form of a giant man-lion. It's described, shining with the light of 1,000 suns and towering over everything, and turned and looked at him. So he ran for his life, but this man-lion caught him and took him to the threshold of his house. Not inside, not outside, on the threshold. And he started trembling when the man-lion lifted him to his lap. Not in the sky, not on the earth, not underneath, but on his lap. And then, to his horror, he saw it was twilight, not morning, not evening. And then the man-lion, his terrible nails and fangs, and he tore him apart. So that was the end of the demon king. And all the worlds were terrified, and they prayed for succor. And so what happened was, the little boy, Prahlāda, went up to him. And so this terrible form became soft and affectionate and took the boy Prahlāda on his lap and looked at him with love. And so that was the end of the story. So that is the demon king Prahlāda. I have to tell this story though. I've told this many times, but it's really funny. So this is a famous theme for theatrical performances, the Indian equivalent of Broadway shows. So once it happened, and I am told on good sources that this really happened. So children in one of our ashrams were performing this play of Prahlāda and Hiranyakashipu. and the incarnation of the man lion. So the climax came, and all of these actors were little kids. The climax came when the demon king, one little kid, shouted, "Where is your God?" And the idea was that the kid dressed as the man lion, he had a big headgear and everything, he would hide behind one of the pillars. The pillars were made of cardboard. And then the demon king would kick down the pillar, and the man lion would jump out with almighty growl and catch hold of the demon king and kill him. So, unfortunately, there were two pillars. And the man lion was, the incarnation was hiding behind one. Everybody could see him. I mean, even the audience could see him. He's pretending to hide. And unfortunately, the demon king couldn't see him from his vantage point. So he said, "Where is your God?" And he says, "Everywhere. In this pillar." And the little boy said, "He's everywhere, but especially behind that pillar." He was a smart little kid. He knew they were heading for disaster. Because if he kicked down the pillar and God was not there, that would ruin the whole point of the play. Among the birds, I am Garuda. Do you have time for one more story? What do you say? Yeah. One more story? Okay, one more story. Yeah. This is another famous story from the Puranas. So Garuda, you will see the iconography of the great bird Garuda, who is the gods have their rides, the vahana, those who bear the gods. So the Divine Mother Durga has the lion, and Vishnu or Narayana has the great bird Garuda. So that's why Krishna says, "Among all birds, I am the great bird Garuda." So the story goes like this: the great sage Kashyapa had two wives, Kadru and Vinita. So you can all see the connection here. Vainateya, literally it means the son of Vinita. Now they were sisters, but they were very jealous of each other. Now at one point they prayed to the sage to bless them with children. And Kadru went first and said, "I want 1,000 children, all valorous and brave and mighty and magnificent." So the sage said, "Let that be so." And then Vinita went and said, "I want only 2, but each should be greater than the 1,000 kids of Kadru." And the sage said, "Let that be so." And then from Kadru came 1,000 eggs, and from Vinita came 2, which shows you that they are not exactly stories of human beings, So 1,000 eggs of Kadru had to be incubated for 1,000 years. And there are details of how they were kept in pots of warm water. And after 1,000 years, the eggs burst forth and these mighty serpents came out. So she is the mother of all the serpents in the world. So mighty snakes, the nagas and all, they came out. Now Vinita's eggs didn't hatch, and she was jealous and she was impatient. So she broke open one of the eggs, and a half-formed child came out. And this child was supposed to have the brilliance of the sun, the midday sun, the glory of the midday sun. But it was not formed. It was half-formed. And the child was furious with his mother and cursed his mother that you're going to be a slave for 500 years until my brother, the one in the other egg, hatches. And then he rose up in the sky. So instead of being the bright golden hue of the midday sun, he was a bright, ruddy red-orange. And his name was Aruna. So, there was the sunrise. You have the color which comes just before the sun rises. It's called Arunodaya. So that is Aruna. He got a job as the driver for the sun god's chariot. So that's his, what in Manhattan you'd call his gig. So so every time the sun rises in the east and goes and sinks in the west, it's basically visualized as the chariot of the sun god racing across the sky, and Aruna, the son of Vinita, is driving the sun god. And so at sunrise, and maybe even at sunset, the ruddy glow you see, that's Aruna. Then what happened 500 years, and there was a little, cut long story short, all right, little bit, I have to explain. How did Vinita become the slave? So Kadru engaged Vinita in a challenge, bet. You know, the divine horse, same Uchchaishravas, which we just read about. It's what's the color of its tail? It's glowing white, so what's the color of the tail? And poor Vinita thought the horse is white, so tail must be white. And she said, it's white. But what she did, Kadru did, was she told her sons, the serpents, to cover the tail of the horse so it looked black from a distance. And so she told Vinita, you have lost the challenge, now you're going to be my slave. And so she became the slave of Kadru for 500 years until the other egg hatched and this mighty bird emerged, Garuda. It was the great bird Garuda. Again, a motif in many Indian temples. Everywhere you have a Vaishnava temple with Vishnu, you will see Garuda standing with hands folded to the side. Not only in India, across Southeast Asia. I was doing some research on this. In Indonesia and I think in Malaysia, in their coat of arms, the military, they have the motif of Garuda. And in many parts, they have in Buddhism, for example, there are birds called Garula, who are golden, huge golden birds, and they are often depicted in motifs where Buddha is teaching. They are standing with their hands folded and listening to the. So they are descendants of the mighty bird Garuda, and so on. And so this Garuda, he rescued his mother. Long story short, he became a sworn enemy of serpents. So he's always often depicted as holding a serpent in one of his claws or eating a serpent. And that's the enmity between hawks and eagles and snakes. And many stories of their rivalry and how he rescues his mother from slavery. And then he got a job too as the ride of Vishnu. So it runs in the family. Aruna drives the sun god, and Garuda is the Vahana or the ride for Vishnu. So that's the story. Basically, Krishna is saying, when you think of Garuda, the mighty Garuda, think of me. All right, we'll stop here. But good progress. I think we did 8 or 9 verses. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.